tired of being overlooked. My struggle with sexism in the Hvac workplace led me to quit after confronting my boss and co-workers. Did I make the right choice? Let me begin by stating that this will be lengthy. I'm a 22-year-old female, and I have 3 main coworkers, to whom I will assign pseudonyms, even though they probably do use Reddit. Stephen, who is approximately 34 years old, and my boss, David, who is 27 years old and the assistant manager, and Patrick, who is 74 years old. I accepted this job knowing that I would primarily work with men, as there are 3 departments: HVAC, electric, and plumbing. I am part of the HVAC section, and the only other woman, whom I will refer to as Stacy, is in plumbing on the opposite side of the store. Since she plays a role in this story, I will provide her with a pseudonym as well. I do not often interact with people from the other departments essentially. I never do. I started this job at the end of January, despite knowing absolutely nothing about HVAC, its components, or how it operates. I am always eager to learn, and I did not care what my responsibilities were. I simply needed a job to pay my bills. They hired me with the understanding that they wanted a woman in the department because it encourages the men to behave better. It was not a big deal to me. I assumed they would either refrain from making inappropriate comments or cease being so disrespectful. Some lighthearted banter was acceptable to me. I enjoy joking around. When I first began, everything seemed to be going well. I was supposed to learn a great deal, and given my initial lack of knowledge, I was absorbing information quickly. I picked up the computer system much faster, thanks to my previous experience as a cashier and a receptionist. During my training period, during which I would likely remain for about a year due to the extensive information I needed to acquire, including more complex topics like full air conditioning units, I mainly shadowed others, assisting with customers and learning the processes of cashing them out. Since we do not have scanners, I was instructed on item codes and best practices for ringing items and processing transactions. At first, it was manageable. However, as I became familiar with my surroundings and gained an understanding of the products, I noticed that my coworkers did not seem to slow down their interruptions. For instance, when a customer directed a question to me and I was speaking, they would often talk loudly over me to answer instead. If I took a few seconds longer to recall a code number, they would provide it for me, and if I stepped away to retrieve my clipboard with code numbers and tips, they would step in and finalize the customer's transaction. I believe I am quick to seek assistance when I have questions or feel uncertain. I request help frequently. While I understand they think they are being helpful, I feel it hinders my ability to learn and problem solve independently. Moreover, talking over me and reiterating what I intended to say, albeit louder, does not allow me sufficient opportunity to engage with our customers and foster relationships with them, as we sometimes see the same clients several times a day, and to earn their trust and respect. Although I am an advocate for women's rights and oppose patriarchy, I am naturally soft-spoken. My coworkers have mentioned, perhaps boasting, that when they anticipate someone will not work out, they tend to quietly push them toward quitting or being fired. If they do terminate someone, they take pride in not paying unemployment benefits and even pursuing court action. Wanting to maintain my job, I have chosen to tolerate this behavior. I was aware of potential sexism, but eventually, it all accumulated. While I can respect different political viewpoints, the workplace should remain neutral regarding such discussions. The presence of a 100 bill displaying Trump's face taped to the wall behind the counter, combined with the constant interruptions and undermining in front of customers finishing their tickets for me and interjecting in regular conversations, intensified my frustration. I felt exasperated when they quickly approached me regarding mistakes, not rudely, without offering any apologies when we realized the fault did not lie with me. Everything began to pile up, and I lacked an outlet. Although I have friends who understand, they do not grasp this specific situation completely. One incident stands out, where while David was clocked out and eating lunch behind the counter, I was assisting a customer who asked for the account name he would be using. After providing it to me, he also gave me the purchase order number. David suddenly sat up and rudely asked the customer who he was in relation to the account owner. The owner or contractor of that account is the father of an electrician. Patrick mentions he works for the customer, But the individual did not hear David initially and asked what he had said, to which David repeated his rude question. David then called the account owner and informed him that someone was attempting to use the account. I assume the owner responded by asking who the individual was, and David simply responded with Mexican. This was insufficient identification, leading the customer to feel confused about why he needed to provide his name in the first place. David then stated he was on the phone with the account owner, prompting the customer to give his name, which confirmed he indeed works for the man and is authorized to use the account. Throughout this exchange, I silently signaled to David that he should stop speaking. After I completed the transaction, I assisted the customer in loading his items into his car. He expressed to me how poorly he had been treated, and I apologized for the incident, acknowledging he did not deserve that. Following that, I refrained from speaking to David unless absolutely necessary for several days. I was apprehensive about discussing the issue with my boss, fearing I might get fired or that it would simply be disregarded. I reasoned that if the situation was going to be overlooked, I might as well ensure I retain my job to continue offering customers basic human decency. However, I now realize I should have said something. This incident was likely the final straw that exacerbated my anger. After about a week of avoiding interaction with David, on a day when I was alone with Stephen, he inquired about what was bothering me and why I was giving David the silent treatment. I explained everything about David, hoping Stephen would recognize that David's actions closely mirrored his own, just less frequently, since he is usually too preoccupied to be aggressive. Stephen completely empathized with my concerns about David's behavior towards a customer and agreed with me. He mentioned that neither David nor Patrick had shared those details with him when he spoke to them. I thought, did you never think to ask me about it? I conveyed my hope that the customer would file a complaint with corporate because something needed to be done regarding David's treatment. To my dismay, he replied that he preferred to handle matters internally when possible. Apparently, David received a stern reprimand. When I broached the topic of David's behavior, which I genuinely question whether it is even sexist anymore, Stephen was somewhat understanding, but frequently interrupted to counter my points based on my experiences. He suggested that we must approach things this way for various reasons. However, at that moment, I largely felt understood. However, I did not see the value in continuing the discussion to inform him that his behavior, like that of David, was also inappropriate just because we were busy. I hoped he might eventually recognize his similarities with David and reflect on this. Furthermore, during the same day, Stephen suggested that my life was easier than his because I only had to find a babysitter once a week for a few hours. I'm a single mother without any family support nearby, meaning I have no relatives, not even in other states. My child has no father. I am the sole provider 24/7. Stephen is married, has children, and his wife is a stay-at-home mom, whom I admire. His comment felt like a significant belittlement of my entire life and existence, yet I remained silent. He was absent for 2 days, and while David's behavior improved slightly, he still managed to respond to questions directed at me. He interrupted me less frequently, but progress is slow. We had a customer whom I had assisted numerous times and had always been very kind. While ringing him up, I asked David for the code for an item, and the customer complimented David for answering my question instead of taking over entirely. I wanted to cry. I told him I didn't think anyone had noticed that, but with that simple comment, I felt validated and respected not merely as a woman, but as a person, and it likely meant nothing to him. This acknowledgement made me even angrier. At this point, I realized it was not simply that they did not understand because they were men. It was that they did not care to understand. Stephen has often said he interjects because he can sense customers' irritation over delays. In reality, however, these customers are generally supportive and kind when given the chance to speak with them, to take my time, and to actually learn. On the second day, feeling frustrated with David's conduct, I recalled that Stephen said he spoke to him, so I called Stephen and requested permission to voice my displeasure with David's actions directly. He insisted he preferred I do so in his presence, which I reluctantly accepted. Out of frustration, I sought out Stacy, assuming that since she is another woman in the workplace, she would understand my situation. After talking for a while, she assured me she comprehended, and I felt better knowing someone heard and validated my experiences. The following day, Stephen informed me we would have a meeting with David to address everything and find a resolution. Unfortunately, everything took a sharp turn when I expressed that my issue was not solely with David, but with Stephen as well. Recall that when I had discussed solely David's behavior, Stephen had presented himself as completely understanding and in agreement. Suddenly, he was genuinely offended. I reiterated that I was not labeling him a sexist. Rather, I asserted that his behavior reflected sexist tendencies. I continued to ask him to allow me to voice my feelings, yet I found myself consistently interrupted. They dominated the conversation, even though the primary purpose of the meeting was to address my feelings. Stephen also informed David that I stated I was scared of him, which honestly seemed absurd to me. I managed to share the incident involving the customer who remarked on David interrupting our transaction, but Stephen simply offered a half-hearted apology before stating that he would reach out to that customer to explain his reasons for his behavior. This only reaffirmed my point. He did not even contemplate apologizing to me for his actions until a man pointed it out, yet he would apologize to that man for what he did to me. Eventually, I concluded that the discussion was futile. I could not make them comprehend because they did not want to understand. He inquired if we had reached a resolution, stating this would be the last time he would address it. I replied dismissively, agreeing to whatever he suggested. He then cautioned me not to discuss my concerns with coworkers from other departments, asserting that he wanted to keep everything internal. He mentioned that Stacy had relayed everything I shared, leaving me feeling betrayed since I believed we had established a confidentiality bond. He left for the day, and later Stacy approached me to clarify that she had not informed him. Her boss had intervened after asking why I had been outside crying with her the previous day. It was her boss who brought the issue to Stephen's attention. In an effort to defend me, she explained that Stephen had involved corporate in the situation. Consequently, when dealing with David's racist behavior toward a customer, corporate would be entangled. I merely sought basic human respect, and now the matter escalated to corporate, necessitating a joint conversation with Stacy to receive another woman's perspective and facilitate mediation. This entire ordeal left me furious. I considered walking out several times because it all felt ridiculous, but I also recognized that I have a child to care for and need to find another job. Today, we conducted our meeting. Right from the beginning, I was continually interrupted by Stephen. Stacy attempted to defend me, but I sensed that my tone was viewed as confrontational, causing her to withdraw her support. They spoke far more than I did throughout the discussion, despite it being about my feelings. Eventually, they claimed that this was no longer about my feelings, but rather about respecting my boss and my actions. They continuously diverted the conversation, insisting they understood my perspective while redirecting everything onto me. Stephen argued that he was not sexist because he has many female cousins. Therefore, how could he be sexist? I consistently maintained that I was not saying he was sexist, but that his actions were problematic. As anger overcame me, tears began to flow. I repeatedly stated that it was about principles, and somehow, he proposed a resolution that did not address the core issue we had assembled to discuss. They insisted I needed to earn everyone's respect, and that it would take time for things to change, essentially telling me to cope with it in essence, declaring it was not going to change. Eventually, when I finally had the chance to share my thoughts, he offered, "Do you just need to go home for the day?" I replied, "How about forever?" and left. They followed me to my car, attempting to explain that they did not want me to quit, but I countered that no one should have to tolerate such treatment. Finally, Stephen asked me, "What have I done that is wrong?" After we had spent 3 days discussing how they treated me and how their actions affected my feelings, and they still did not comprehend a single word I said, I threw up my arms in disbelief, feeling exasperated, and got into my car. Am I overreacting? Story 2. After 11 years, I discovered notes in my husband's wallet professing love for another woman. Confronting him revealed his coldness and lack of remorse. As he continues seeing her, I am left wondering, what did she offer that I couldn't, and did I push him away? I need to express my frustrations. I cannot maintain no contact with my ex because we share 2 children together. It has been extremely difficult to keep our communication to a minimum and focus solely on the kids. I was in a relationship with this man for 11 years. In December, I discovered notes in his wallet. The notes read, "You are so amazing, I love you, my sexy bacon." That is how she spelled "you are." And another note stated, "I love you from your sexy marshmallow." I confronted him later that night after we had put our children to sleep, and the first thing he asked me was what I wanted to do, as if he showed no remorse or regret. In August or September, he told me he was working overtime. He typically works first shift, but he claimed he had to be in at 12 a.m. This seemed unusual to me, so I had someone check if his car was there, and they told me it was not. I was in denial, so I went to check for myself. He was not there. I concocted a story to say that I needed to get a hold of him and had called his job to confirm his presence. I informed him that his job told me he was not there and that there was no one by that name. He told me he did not report to anyone since it was overtime and that they, in fact, did not know he was at work. I explained that I had checked and his car wasn't there. He claimed he had supposedly left for a bit to smoke. He started smoking after being diagnosed with sleep apnea, but I was unaware that he did this while at work, if he was even doing that. Regardless, it is wrong. Then he sent me a text saying that he thought he was done and that things weren't getting better. In 2021, I discovered I was pregnant with our second child, and when I told him, he was not pleased. I started to develop some resentment because he was not as loving and caring as he had been during my first pregnancy. Fast forward to February 2022, I lost my father and became depressed. Throughout all of this, while I was pregnant, he was not supportive. He would dismiss and avoid me. When I was awake and crying, he did not care. When I expressed my feelings of hatred towards my body after having our 2 sons, I had cesarean sections, he showed no concern. I know it is my responsibility to love myself, but when the person you love does not express their affection or provide reassurance, it makes everything difficult. This pattern continued, and I built up resentment towards him for this and various other reasons, such as consistently prioritizing his friends over me and our family. One day before my second son's cesarean section, he chose to go out with his friends. He did the same thing when I was pregnant with our first child. Just days before he was born, he opted to spend our anniversary with his friends, claiming it was too late to cancel. All of this and more fueled my resentment and made me feel a specific way toward him, but I kept trying. I attempted to communicate my feelings, but when I did, he would shut me down, insisting he did not want to argue. If something did occur, he would avoid discussing it, suppressing everything. Fast forward to April of last year, just a few months before the overtime incident, we went on a trip and things were challenging. I felt overwhelmed, and he kept telling me that things were not the same. I was still grieving and, for some reason, experienced my first panic attack prior to the trip. While on the trip, it happened again because he was being distant around his family. I felt like an outsider and isolated. I struggled with suicidal thoughts during this time. At one point during the trip, he broke down, but when I tried to comfort him, he did not want to talk. He just shut down again, and we barely spoke for the remainder of the trip. Upon returning home, things became worse. We became even more distant. Fast forward to the overtime incident when he told me he thought he was done. I tried to sit him down to discuss what he wanted to do, but he repeatedly responded with, "I don't know." I kept telling him that if he wanted to end our relationship and leave, that was his choice, and I would not hold him back if he was unhappy. Every time I asked, he just said, "I don't know." We were still living together, and he was uncertain about his next steps. As time went on, he stopped eating at home, avoided the groceries I bought, and neglected outdoor maintenance as well as minimal help inside the house. He used to assist with cooking, especially since I also work, but he stopped doing that, only providing the children with simple meals that he could prepare quickly. Whenever I tried to talk to him, he would ignore me. He would not speak to me and stopped sleeping next to me. Earlier in the year, he ceased being intimate with me, saying it did not feel right. That should have raised a red flag. This was before our trip. Anyway, things continued this way until I felt as if I hated him because he treated me as if I did not exist in our own home. He would completely ignore my presence. When I would ask something, he would not even respond, and I kept essentially allowing it. Until December, when I discovered those notes, everything suddenly made sense. I wanted to understand why, if I gave him chances to leave, he did not take them. Why didn't he tell me that he wanted to be with someone else? I felt betrayed and believed I was pushing him away because I was depressed, which led me to question why this was happening. It became clear when he stopped answering my messages or returning my calls while he supposedly went out with friends, then returned around hotel checkout times. I connected the dots after finding those notes. I issued him an ultimatum to go to therapy, but told him he could not continue seeing her and could stay in our house. To this, he responded that he did not know what to do. I was so upset that he did not appear to have remorse or regret. If he genuinely wanted to be with me and the children, he would have shown some signs of regret, but he did not. I experienced significant anxiety, so I insisted he move in with his mother, and he complied. His family was shocked by the situation. He never mentioned this person or our problems to them. I later discovered that it was a coworker. I sought answers from him about how long this affair had been going on since the beginning of last year, after our trip, or when he started to become distant toward me. But he was unwilling to share this information. Our communication was poor. I could not talk to him without feeling anxious, and he would avoid talking to me even about our children, responding minimally. At some point in late January, I hoped our communication would improve. He told me he regretted not being supportive while I was pregnant and during my father's passing. I thought perhaps he was beginning to realize things since he was no longer living in our home. He found a house to rent, and perhaps space was beneficial. I hoped he had stopped seeing this other woman after witnessing all the damage it had caused and how it further disrupted our family life. I believed that with improved communication, things could be salvaged. I had previously asked him to attend therapy with me when I was going for my loss, but he declined. Nonetheless, I thought he had ended his affair. He did not want to provide me with his new address but eventually did, and I just happened to drive by and noticed a car parked in front of his house. I later discovered the same car at his workplace, which I should not have done, but I decided to wait to see who it was. Additionally, 3 months after my second son was born, I came across messages from a girl named Amanda telling him to stop it, stating, "You know you look good," suggesting he was seeking validation. Regardless, I waited, and when I saw the person approach the car, I was shocked. I was unsure whether to feel happy or angry. However, I was upset because this person was older, though that shouldn't matter. We are both 28, and she appeared to be in her 40s. I kept wondering why he would choose her. I had envisioned someone different. I imagined someone beautiful, perhaps a registered nurse, working in a hospital, rather than someone who simply cleans and sets up. I drove up next to her and asked for her name. She confirmed that she worked in his department but mostly in the office. It all made sense regarding the sticky notes. I then asked her if, by any chance, she was seeing him. She vehemently denied it, claiming, "Hell no, I would never, he's the setup guy." I essentially told her he was cheating on me and that we had been together for so long and had children. I simply wanted to know the truth, but she denied knowing anything, stating she barely saw him and that they worked together. I did not expect her to divulge anything. Honestly, she was not obligated to, but her reaction indicated she was aware of me and our children. I anticipated he would become angry, and he did. He was not prepared for me to know who she was, and he was clearly upset that I had driven by and discovered the truth. I did not do it again or approach her any further. Then, Valentine's Day arrived a week later, and when he came to pick up our children, I noticed he was wearing a sweater over something. I knew it was a gift. I couldn't grasp why he continued to hide things, but his car was unlocked, so I took a look inside. I found shirts that he typically would not wear. He is not into brands, yet they were brand-name shirts. She gifted him candy he does not eat, chips he does not consume, a cologne he had previously never worn, and an envelope that read, "From your love." Additionally, there was alcohol. If you genuinely care about someone, and if you understand them, you would recognize that he has a minor drinking problem. Why would she encourage it? I would never buy him alcohol. In fact, I had told him in the past that I thought he had been drinking too much, which he acknowledged. I keep analyzing our past messages, wondering when it all began and why he chose her over trying to fix our relationship. Is the grass really greener on the other side? Is she truly so great that he would rather throw away 11 years and disrupt our children's lives? Our sons are so young, and my oldest keeps asking me questions like why Daddy couldn't live with us or what is wrong with him. Hearing his questions breaks my heart. What did she possess that I could not provide? Why wasn't I worth it? Does he genuinely love and care for this individual after treating me so poorly before I discovered the truth? Yet, I still issued him an ultimatum and wanted him to express remorse and indicate he wanted to return. He seems happy while I am in counseling, trying to piece our life back together, battling depression and anxiety. Why could he not put the effort he has been investing with this woman into our relationship? Why not with our children? Was he ever going to share the truth with me? If you have read all of this, thank you. I genuinely needed to vent. This has been incredibly challenging. I keep comparing myself and questioning. If she is older, why do they get hotel rooms instead of going to her house? I assumed she was young because they were booking rooms together. Maybe she lived with her parents. All of this keeps running through my mind. I just needed to vent. I continue to think about what could have been if I had not been depressed, or what I could have done differently. We argued yesterday about communication, and I kept trying to explain that the people surrounding him now may not always be present, but our children will always be a part of him. He is bonded to them. As their mother, I will always be involved in their lives as well, so why not work on our communication and co-parenting? Instead, he claimed that nothing he does is good enough, and that I am belittling him because I told him I think he is letting his mind become clouded and is not seeing who truly matters and the bigger picture. By the way, I could have said hurtful things to him, considering that on Friday, our children left with him, and one returned wearing the same underwear while the other came back in the same clothes as on Friday. He insisted that I dismiss how he feels and that I make him feel like he is not enough. Did I cause this? Did I lead him to seek validation elsewhere? Story 3. Aita for not wanting my mother's so to be called anything but his name by my daughter. Hello, Reddit. I am here for exactly what the title indicates. I apologize for any grammatical errors or if it seems like I am ranting. This is my first post on Reddit. For context, a bit of background information is necessary. I am a 27-year-old female and have an 18-month-old daughter. My mother and her significant other, whom we will refer to as Jerry, have been together for 12 years now. Jerry is a noticeable alcoholic who purchases at least 2 30-packs of beer each day, and sometimes even more. He is also a gun owner. While I do not have an issue with responsible gun ownership, it is relevant to this story. Back in 2015, we lived in a trailer home with an open field. On August 3, 2015, Jerry decided he wanted to do some target practice with his 12-gauge shotgun in the backyard. I was outside with him, approximately 5 feet behind him, listening to music and watching him while sitting against a tree. The target he was shooting at was an aluminum sink, which was no more than 60 feet away from him at the time. He shot at the sink, and it shattered, causing a piece to strike my eye, resulting in blindness in my right eye. When it happened, I screamed in pain and felt terrified because I could not see anything with that eye. All I could see was gray and what appeared to be floating strings. I was crying and telling him that something was wrong and that I was not okay. He insisted that it was probably just gunpowder from when he fired the gun, but I insisted otherwise. My mother was at work when this occurred, and I screamed at him that I needed to go to the hospital. He thought I was being dramatic and suggested that I wash my eye out with water. I called my mother, sobbing, and told her that I needed her to come home because I could not see and needed to go to the hospital. I explained everything that had happened as best as I could. She arrived about 30 minutes later and took me to the emergency room. Before we left, Jerry told her it was probably just gunpowder in my eye, and she believed him. When the doctors were finally able to see me, my mother informed them of Jerry's assumption. However, they discovered that a piece of the sink had lodged itself in my eye, and that I needed to be rushed to a hospital out of state because they lacked the necessary tools, and a team experienced with eye issues like mine. I was transported to an emergency room an hour and a half away, where they removed the piece and found severe damage to my retina. I almost lost my eye, and if it were not for the doctors who operated on me, I would have. I now have permanent vision impairment in my right eye and will require a contact lens for the rest of my life. I have a permanent blind spot that obscures half of my vision in my right eye, leading to frequent headaches centered around my good eye, as it works harder to compensate for my impaired vision. All of this occurred because he wanted to engage in target practice while intoxicated at a metal sink. He apologized to me soon after the incident and tried to buy my favorite food items as a way of making amends. I had to repeat a school year due to missing an entire month of school for my surgeries. I underwent one procedure to inject a fluid to hold my almost detached retina in position, and another to remove that fluid and replace it with gas that would disperse over a 2-month period. After both surgeries, I was not allowed to lift my head at all for 3 weeks and had to lie face down continuously. My mother had to check on me several times each night to ensure I was sleeping with my head face down off the bed. I did not speak to Jerry for 3 months following the accident. I have never, and will never, accept that it was just an accident or it never should have happened, as my mother keeps trying to tell me. I do not forgive Jerry for the mistake that cost me my vision in my right eye. When I had my daughter in 2023, I informed my mother, even before I was halfway through my pregnancy, that I would never trust Jerry to be alone with my child. This is especially true since he is still drinking excessively, as he did when this incident occurred. I also told her that I did not want him to be referred to as anything other than his name. She reacted strongly, asking me why, and when I explained my reasons, she told me to let it go since it happened so long ago. I made it clear that I did not care whether she agreed with me or not. This was my decision. I later spoke to my sister to ask if I was in the wrong for not forgiving him. She suggested that I was partly to blame for being behind him while he was shooting, even though I had no idea what he was aiming at. I walked away from her and went home. Later, she sent me a message saying that he would not be around for much longer anyway, so what did it matter? His doctor has advised him to stop drinking because his liver is starting to fail and he has developed diabetes. So Reddit, am I the antagonist?